Welcome to 30 Minute Reviews. I am Adam. Okay, we're going to discuss Shane this week, but had something else I want to talk about instead. So we're going to talk about that instead. Let's start out with the continuing row between AMC theaters and Universal Studios, not the amusement park chain Universal Studios, the movie production company. So let's take a minute to recap where we were. If you've been following this, coronavirus hit, theaters shut down. As a result, Universal Pictures moved Trolls World Tour to a digital release. Digital release does phenomenally, and they go out and proudly say the movie made more money than the original Trolls movie did in its entire theatrical run. Now, Trolls made $375 million in its theatrical run. What they meant was that they made more of a profit off of that than they did off of the first Trolls movie. Okay. Then AMC sees this and says, fine, you can do that, you're free to do that, but we will not be showing your movies in our theaters anymore. At that same time, Regal came out and said, we're going to stand with AMC on this, and we are also going to, we will not be showing movies from Universal in our theaters. And then Odeon abroad also said the same thing. We are now summed up to where we were previously. Now it is being reported that Regal has dropped out of that. No, we're still going to show Universal movies. So now it's just AMC standing on this boycott where they're not going to show any Universal movies in any of their theaters for the time being. Of course, nothing being shown in theaters right now. Theaters are all closed. So how do they move from here? Because Regal has dropped out of this, I'm thinking there is a point to this. I think I mentioned this last week. AMC has AMC On Demand. And AMC On Demand is a service where you can go onto the AMC app and you can buy older movies on digital. And even like Invisible Man was available on there when they put that online early, and all of that kind of stuff was available through AMC On Demand for the same price as everywhere else. Now, what I'm thinking this is a power play by AMC to get an exclusive contract with Warner Brothers, not Warner Brothers, Universal, to make it a first run streaming. Where it's like you can stream it, but we want you to stream it through us so we can still get a cut of the profits on that at the same time. And I get it makes sense. It's actually a pretty good business move if they can do it. And then this week's other big news happened. Stars of Trolls World Tour, Justin Timberlake and Anna Kendrick, have their agents reaching out to reaching out to Universal and being like, cordially, what the fuck? And in this case, they're referring to the fact that both of them got screwed out of the back-end deal in their contracts to appear in the movie. Now, allegedly, according to what I've read from The Hollywood Reporter, the back-end deal is basically as the movie makes money, the actors make money. So, like, Robert Downey Jr. has these massive back-end deals on on like Infinity War and Endgame, and he has it on Iron Man. It's a way you take a pay cut on the front. You don't get as much paid up front, but then as residuals come in, it increases your royalty as the movie comes in. It's a smart maneuver because as the movie continues, you're going to continue to make money on it. Now, the issue is with this, they did not pay them this because the contract had the back end bonus based on box office performance. The movie does not have a box office performance because it went digital only, and the actors in the movie did not find out until the day it was announced. It was like March 16th, I think, when they announced they were putting Trolls World Tour on digital, which is how they got more money on the movie. Because that's the thing is they announced, we made so much more profit here, and it makes sense why. When you put a movie on digital, you make a bigger percentage of the profit than when you put it in theaters. You don't have to pay distribution costs, there's no theater standees, no promotional tie-ins with the theater. All that promotional money, you don't have to spend anymore. So you're making more. On top of the fact that you're taking a bigger cut of the profit when you a bigger cut of the money coming in when you buy a movie on digital. The studio gets more money then. Now on top of that, they aren't paying their actors properly, and they're screwing the actors out of money. So that's also how they're doing it. Now, in the future, with other movies that are coming out, these contracts will be renegotiated with this in mind. With the fact that we're going to be putting it on digital the same day, that's going to count too. And I think that the company that does the metrics for the box office should start reporting independently the same way they do box office numbers, which makes the conspiracy theories about people buying tickets of their own movie ridiculous for a variety of reasons. But that's one of them. Is this independent company should be reporting on these numbers as well to make sure it's impartial and fair. That way the studio's not under-reporting and to make sure that, or over-reporting for that matter. Now, that's going to be the big thing that comes out of this now, is the fact that because they're able to make so much money on it because they're screwing everyone around them on the way out. And I think that this is going to have one of two impacts. It's going to make people rethink their contracts with Universal when they go into further movies. If this goes on for too much longer, what's going to happen to No Time to Die? Because if I'm thinking of No Time to Die, I'm thinking there's no way Daniel Craig doesn't have a back-end deal on that. Or Ralph Fiennes. Jurassic World. Dominion. If that one has a similar... if it still goes on long enough where that is impacted. And the thing is, too, now the question is, if the theaters reopen and theaters reopen to half capacity, these deals that were on the back end, inherently these movies can't make as much money because they can't have as many seats filled in the theater. So how is that going to work? How are these deals going to be impacted then where... why am I going to do that? I'm going to want more upfront payment, which is going to inflate the budget of these movies, and it's going to, it's going to make these stars have, star power, and because they're by putting it into the back end, they're able to basically afford the stars a little bit easier. And now it's going to impact in other ways. The budget's going to be renegotiated for these movies, and I'm going to take that into consideration, and it's going to cost more for the movies to make a profit. It's going to be an interesting thing to see how this plays out, because now I think stars are going to have to think twice before they enter into contracts with Universal. And I do think by the end of this, it's going to be rectified by the time the movie theaters reopen, be it for Tenet, as misguided as Christopher Nolan might be for thinking that's going to be the movie's going to revitalize the theater industry, or, come later in the year when the theaters do finally reopen. The issue is going to end up being, how do we work these deals? Does they open the theater at quarter capacity or half? Let's use half capacity. And if we have the domestic box office of a major release, if we say Black Widow would have done, let's say, Captain Marvel numbers. If we have the domestic box office on that, that's a lot of money that then Scarlett Johansson doesn't get paid. And then not that it matters because her character's dead, but does that sour her from working with Disney again? Because she got screwed on that. I think it's a valid question. So I think that's really the only update we have on the theater situation. Oh, and also Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan is an ass. He thinks that Tenet is going to be the movie that's going to make people come back to theaters and all of that. Here's the thing. Like him as a director. Love Interstellar. Like Inception. Love The Dark Knight. I think that I don't think that Tenet is going to do what he thinks he's going to do for theaters. You need a big marquee movie. I know he's a big marquee director, like Scorsese is, but I don't think that he's going to, I don't think that he quite is grasping what it is going to happen. Dunkirk did that kind of money that it did because of when it came out. It had a favorable week, and yes, this is going to have a favorable week too, because it's up against nothing. But it's going to not. I don't think it's going to do as much money as you think it's going to. I think he's better off pushing it off till September, and then reevaluating as it gets closer. But I don't know. Like, if you're saying you need to see the theater, you need to see this movie in the theater to fully experience it. And there are movies where the theater experience is important, like and you can't underestimate the theater experience. Because like Avatar is a movie that I saw in theaters. I loved that movie in theaters. Couldn't stand it watching it. I couldn't get into it watching it at home. As a kid, I saw all the Star Wars movies at home before seeing Revenge of the Sith in theaters, and I liked it. I thought it was cool. And then Revenge of the Sith came out, and I saw that in theaters, and that was what made me a fan. Like, and I will never be able to forget what it felt like to sit down in the theater when The Force Awakens came out, and just like Episode 7, The Force Awakens, comes in the opening crawl, and I'm just I felt like a child again. And then like Endgame, the theater experience for Endgame was something that I'll never forget either, because like that, I don't usually like rowdy like movie crowds, because like I'm here to watch the movie, but like there was an electricity to that crowd that was just so amazing. I've never been in a theater that packed opening night, and the crowd reacting as the movie happened is just it's an experience you can't take away. But it's just nothing will ever quite live up to what that was. I don't think there's gonna be another movie gonna be able to hit that note, unless they do like Secret Wars, and they bring back a bunch of people. I don't think that's likely to be matched ever. So I think that yes, the theaters are important. I also don't think any movie is worth risking your life over. Like if Endgame came out, and Endgame was the movie that they're going to put back in theaters and be like, this is going to be the first one back. If it wasn't safe for me to go in, I'd be like, you know what? I'll read the spoilers online and I'll see it when it comes out in my house, but I'm not risking that. And that's the other thing, too, with this, is when we talk about the movie release at home, you're still not getting, especially for kids' movies. That's the thing that we're not really looking at with this, is that it made a profit faster. But I feel like the theater is still a better option for a kid's movie. Because at home, I don't know, because it goes back and forth, because like they made a profit faster, which means they sold significantly less tickets, I would assume. Because the thing is, a kid's movie, you got to sell inherently at least 2 tickets. Unless you're counting me when I go to see like Toy Story 4 to review it. But typically you're selling 2 tickets. You're selling a parent and a child. You're not doing that when you sell it in the house. You're selling it at half the price time, because the parent and the child, instead of paying $20 each, is paying $10 each. If they have multiple kids, that discrepancy gets bigger and bigger. So if a family of 4 is watching the movie opening night, they're going to be paying about $80 in New York. If I'm renting the movie to watch as a family of 4, they're going to be paying $20 to see the movie. I think that's part of why the studios are kind of doing that math a little bit and thinking like, well, at what point does this become a problem? Because like when you get to movies like Black Widow, No Time to Die, you're going to get groups getting together to watch the movie and pooling money to pay for it, which is why like back at CinemaCon, I want to say this is like 4 years ago, we talked about it on the show when it happened. I didn't know I was going to be going off on this tangent, otherwise I would have found the audio clip talking about it. But there was an idea where you could pay $50 to see a movie opening night in your house. And that was something that was kind of a good idea, because it was meant for parties, not for an individual who didn't want to go to the movies. So like if you wanted to have a viewing party in your house, you can pay $50 and you would get Black Widow and you'd be able to watch it in your house by yourself. Now, and that was kind of like the middle ground they found. This is an extenuating circumstance, so they're not going to implement a system like that right this second in the middle of a global pandemic, because then it's like, well, now you're just trying to exploit us, and then it looks bad. But if you put it out for $20 on digital right now, it's fine. And then next week, I think we have another major digital release for a movie I've been looking forward to actually for a while. Yeah, next Friday is Scoob. I've been looking forward to that movie. I'm not gonna lie, I like when I saw the trailers for it and I saw that they were bringing in a bunch of characters from Hanna-Barbera and other things. I'm very on board for that. So I'll pick it up and I'll watch it. But it seemed it's going to be coming next week on digital. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out because I think, if I remember correctly, that one is a Warner Brothers release. Warner Brothers Animation. And that'll be there first. Sony has one that's going digital first. I forgot what it was, though. I'm thinking of Bloodshot. Bloodshot went digital 11 days after release. Maybe that's a mistake I'm making. Now, Scoob is another one to be interesting to watch because that comes out next week. Scoob is a movie where they were been talking about. They put it on digital, but Warner Brothers had said prior that they've been reevaluating the theater model altogether. Now, AMC did not take a strong stance against Warner Brothers, probably because of the strength of IP behind Warner Brothers. If you look at the strength of IP behind Universal, they have the Fate of the Fury, they have the Fast and the Furious franchise, which made about $1 billion, maybe close to $1.5 billion every year, every 2 years, assuming they don't continue with Hobbs and Shaw on alternating years. Jurassic World, which has had 3 movies since 2015. The next one comes 2 movies in 2015. The first one made $1 billion. The second one did not crack $1 billion. Then there was what was the other one? They have one other really big major James Bond, which is going to be entering a weird hiatus period because this is Daniel Craig's last movie, so they got to find a new Bond. It's going to be like a soft reboot kind of thing. This is going to present. This is a movie. This is a studio that can kind of be like, you know what, we're going to step back a little bit. You guys got this. Warner Brothers, on the other hand, can't quite do that. They can't do that too. Warner Brothers has DC Comics behind them, so they'd be passing up. If they were doing a Justice League movie, The Flash, they'd be passing up. They'd be passing up on Aquaman 2. Aquaman made $1 billion. They'd be passing up on Shazam sequel, Black Adam with The Rock. They'd be passing up on inevitable Suicide Squad, The Batman. If they make another Birds of Prey movie, because Birds of Prey was phenomenal, but they'd be passing up on all of that, and that would be a bad decision on their part. On the other end of things, they also have a bunch of they have all the Warner Brothers animation, they have, there's a lot that Warner Brothers has, and they bring it multiple times a year. Also Harry Potter, Godzilla, which is, I thought that was Lionsgate, The Matrix, the Conjuring universe, Creed sequels, Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes, the Mad Max franchise, Pacific Rim, all the Oceans movies that continue to do Ocean's 8. There's Scooby-Doo, obviously. Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, It. There's a lot. But with all of that in play, you end up in this weird situation where now they can't really take a stand against Warner Brothers. They can't say, you know, they can't take the same stance that they were going to take there. Like if Lionsgate said it 100%, they would say, because like, what are they going to do? Pass up on the Hunger Games? They have one new book coming out, so it's like, okay, well, fine. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But let's wrap up with that for this week. And let's talk about the other topic that I want to talk about at length. The Star Wars Expanded Universe. We talked about that a lot lately. I did just finish up my reread of the Thrawn trilogy. Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and the Last Command. Now, I think if they were going to bring this back into, I don't think there's going to be any chance of them doing a straight adaptation back into the existing canon. That said, the book fits surprisingly well into the existing canon. Everything about it kind of still lines up as, you know, with what we have. Now, the book can, as it is, be reestablished into the existing canon pretty easily. Now, most of the changes that would need to be made would be on how it relates to the prequels, more than how it relates to the sequels. Because like the big changes that happen in regards to the sequels are like, if we look at this as just this and not looking at the wider extended universe where Mara and Luke get married and there's all this kind of stuff, but if we look at just this trilogy, it, in regards to the original trilogy, is in line with what we have for the original trilogy, obviously because it came out after. So stuff having to do with Mara's origin kind of works. Mara's origin, I would change and make her a Sith Inquisitor instead of Empress. I don't want to muddy up any further what you do with like the rule of two exists, but then like the Sith Inquisitors also exist, and then there's like okay, like and then there's also the Emperor's Hand. It's like it's all very confusing for absolutely no reason. Now, the other major change that would need to be changed from Mara would be on the back end, at the end of her story. I'm going to spoil it a little bit for you guys, only because, you know, the book's been out for almost a decade at this point, so really, if you didn't read it yet, that's kind of on you. Also, not a decade, like 25 years. This Heir to the Jedi came out in like 91. But here's the thing. The book ends with Luke giving Mara his lightsaber, and she takes over as, and she, you know, goes on her merry way with her lightsaber. I'm sorry, Luke's lightsaber, the one from Bespin. Because what happens is Jedi Master Sabaoth finds Luke's hand and the severed hand and the saber from the fight at Bespin, uses it to clone a new Luke, Metacrisis Doctor style, and that new Luke, which is Luke with two U's, has to fight Luke and Mara at a cloning facility. Now, a lot to unpack there, but they end up killing Luke. They end up killing Luke, and that lightsaber gets passed to Mara. Here is the thing, though. That lightsaber ends up in the possession of Maz Kanata. So, unless we're going to end it where she ends up with the lightsaber and then she ends up dying, and the lightsaber ends up in Maz Kanata's possession after that, I don't think that's likely. I think what's more likely is we say the lightsaber followed its own trajectory back to Maz Kanata, independent of her. So she has her own lightsaber who throughout, and, you know, she finds it at the end of the movie in the Emperor's Palace. It was locked away somewhere. Meanwhile, I think the only other character you really have to rectify there, the changes for the new timeline, is Leia. Because Leia had a pretty drastic change coming out of Bloodlines. Number one, the book has her pregnant with twins through most of it, and the twins, Jason and Jaina, are born in The Last Command. That is less the issue because you can just have it right before she has Ben. But the book's entire plot, the bigger issue is that her story is entirely predicated on her relationship to the Nogri, an alien race who served Darth Vader, and the fact that they blindly serve her because she was the daughter of Vader is why they end up siding with the rebels over Thrawn and his and the Empire, and that's a pretty big plot point. Bloodlines, however, illustrates that the fact that she's related to Darth Vader is something that they keep a secret, and then when it comes out, it's kind of this big inflection point that destroys her credibility and her reputation within the New Republic. And it's part of the reason, not the entire reason, part of the reason why the New Republic and the Resistance had this kind of schism and they split off into two kind of different sects, but they're kind of the same thing. It's kind of weird. And that's probably the bigger, that's, you know, something that you can change. You just have this be the catalyzing incident for how the guy who reveals it finds out that she's related to Vader. So for me, that's a catalyzing incident where it's like, because she's openly working with the Nogri, it needs to be known that that's why, and then it's like, the circle's kind of small, but if it leaks out, that's probably the best way to handle it in that regard. The bigger question that ends up, you really need to do a lot of deep story cleansing, kind of, is Sabaoth. Now, this trilogy came out in the early 90s, before Revenge of the Sith. Before The Phantom Menace, The Clone Wars, and the prequels. As such, the only reference to the Clone Wars that we ever had, to the fact of their existence, was when Leia leaves the message for, leaves the message for Obi-Wan, where she says, you served my father during the Clone Wars. In the 90s, cloning at the time was considered to be a moral ambiguity, and something that, let's not say ambiguity, let's just say it was outright frowned upon. It was something that people were, people were not, completely on board with. No, I mean, even to this day, people aren't on board with it, but science fiction has always been a reflection of how things are at that time. So let's look at Metropolis, the movie that really was the first kind of theatrical adaptation of the first theatrical science fiction movie. At that time, and if you look at Frankenstein and all these other movies from that era, science fiction is more about do not go against the order of God. And that's what it is. It's very religious tone, using science to counteract what God wants. It's kind of like, even if you look at Tower of Babel, the Tower of Babel, I think we consider that one of the first science fiction stories. It's people building something to go against God's wishes. And it's very low tech, but that's what they were doing. They were using what they, what were they trying to, they were trying to use what humanity had to go against what God wanted, and that was, frowned upon. It's like, don't, science fiction's always been cautionary, and they're using science as a cautionary tale in that regard. Because of the fact that we're using it as a cautionary tale, the Clone Wars are interpreted at this point in a way that's very different from what we know. And this is riddled throughout all of the books. Number one, let's talk about Sabaoth's role. Sabaoth's role was confidant to the Chancellor, who would later become the Emperor, and also was a spy on the Jedi Council for him. What character fills that role now? Anakin Skywalker. So you need to rewrite his role a little bit, first off. Second off, they refer to him as a Dark Jedi, not as a Sith Lord. And I understand why, because the Sith they had the rule of two, and he wasn't really an apprentice to, he wasn't quite an apprentice to Sidious, but at the same time, it's like, I don't know what we can define him as, but the concept of a Dark Jedi is kind of silly. Because a Jedi who turns to the dark side isn't a Dark Jedi, they're a Sith. So I don't like that terminology. Then there's the whole issue of what the Clone Wars are. Now, the book talks about the Grand Army of the Republic, but the Grand Army of the Republic is made up of conscripts, not of clones. In the prequels, the clones were created after an order by Sifo-Dyas. So because of that, it completely flips it on its head. Now, the cloning facilities seem to be secretive, not because they were afraid of military from the Confederacy trying to find them and then trying to keep the location a secret, because the cloning facility was kind of centralized on Kamino. The cloning facilities in this version of Clone Wars, as it's illustrated, are secretive because what it seemed like happened was it was done by a rogue person who created armies of clones to try to take over the galaxy, which makes sense for the time period where they're trying to view the clones as a weapon that could be abused instead of as people. So that was something else. Another thing that they need to kind of work on is the fact that the Dark Force from Dark Force Rising is a fleet of warships that existed in the New Republic before the Clone Wars began. And in the movies, we know that the Republic didn't have a military until Sidious, pulled all the strings in the war to make it where they needed one to build the Empire. So So I think that's the biggest thing they need to do is the relationship to the Clone Wars, and a lot of that needs to change. And if a lot of that changes, it completely changes what the movie how you can do the story. And after rereading it, I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking they did the right thing by pulling Thrawn out and putting him in an entirely different era from where he was originally. Because what that does is it gives you more space to explore the character. It's still the same base character. He's still the Grand Admiral of the Imperial Navy. He's still one of the best strategists. He still has a deep appreciation for art. He's the same character. It's just you set him in a different time, and it allows you to tell the story differently. Which brings us to the question: now, if Mara Jade is the character everyone wants to make canon again, I think you should do that with her too. Now, I think you could move Mara Jade and put her in a different era. I'm not saying put her into the Republic or put her into even pre-Empire. I think that having her out there as a loner is probably the best way to do it. Leave her independent of the failed Jedi Order that Ben, massacres. And I would say maybe, it'd be interesting to see her make the turn to the light side without anyone helping. And it'd be interesting to see if we can go through, if you can do that and tell her story independent of independent of the Thrawn and Talon Card and all these other characters, and not have people call her a Mary Sue. If you tell the story basically the same, it'd be an interesting test because Mara Jade is an example of a character I'd like to hold up and say, "See, I'm not sexist. I like Mara Jade." But it'd be interesting to see. Excuse me. We'll wrap up there for today. We'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, have a great rest of your week.